Hey. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Happy Friday. And it's good to see you all. Oh, I want to make sure that we have all of our folks on the screen. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Janisha Jones. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the community events manager at Modern Sales Pros. I'm also your tech host, and my job today is to make sure that you get the most out of this panel and, of course, that you have a great time. So we're super excited to have you all here to talk about strategies for fixing your biggest seller challenges with a stellar group of panelists, and you will get to know them pretty soon. But before we get started, I just wanted to do a brief overview of Modern Sales Pros. So for those of you not familiar with MSP, where you been? Are you under a rock? Because we are the world's largest community of revenue leaders and professionals. Our mission is to create a great environment for our 20,000 and growing members, as well as answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see solutions they may not know about. We do that through great live sessions like these, through our robust online forum, and of course, in-person events in the near future. So if you like this content, you will love our Revenue Excellence Summit Supercharged happening in April from the 12th to the 14th. So stop missing out and get pre-registered for the summit, and I'll drop the link to that in the chat shortly. Lastly, before we get started, I have some housekeeping notes, of course. First, this event is being recorded, and you'll be able to access this recording and key takeaways on the previous events page and of the MSP website, so you can always have great information when you most need it. Second, if you have a question for the panelists, please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A function, and we'll be sure to get that to them during the event. And finally, let's focus on how to get the most out of this session by introducing you to our sponsor. So we have Forma AI sponsoring this event today. And so I'm going to pass the mic to Alain, the VP of Revenue Optimization at Forma, to introduce us to the amazing work that they do.
Thank you, Janisha. Forma AI is the first incentive comp management solution that really uses a scientific model-driven approach to help companies design, execute, and optimize sales comp in one single platform. Gone are the days of formula building, broken promises from many ICM providers. Our unique end-to-end approach really transforms one of the largest cost centers in the organization into its most powerful driver for revenue growth and profitability. If you want to learn more, check us out at forma.ai and feel free to reach out to me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you
My
to
pleasure.
Forma. And now I want to introduce you all to our incredible moderator for today's panel. That's Steve Silver, who we are just so happy to have again with MSP. He's going to be leading this fabulous panel. And so Steve, please introduce yourself. And folks, I'll be back on a little bit later with closing notes at the end. But take it away, Steve.
Okay. Did you want to introduce Christine, or are we going to come to that?
You will introduce Christine.
I will introduce
Please
Christine.
and thank you.
Okay. All right. So, well, thank you, Janisha. So I'm Steve Silver. I work at Forrester. I'm the VP Research Director for Forrester's Sales Operations Group. And you may know Forrester. We're a research and advisory firm focused on helping B2B organizations improve the performance, in our case, of their sales, marketing, and product organizations. In other words, the overall revenue engine. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Alain and Christine. And Christine, do you want to do a quick introduction before we dive into some of the topics for today?
Sure. Hi, my name is Christine Nolan. I'm the Director of Sales for our account management team at HackerOne. And I'm actually also just announcing that I'm going to be moving roles to a new company for Starburst Data in the next couple of weeks. So I'm excited to talk about compensation here, but also what that means for future.
Yeah, I think, first of all, congratulations.
And
I think it's interesting when we have either sales operations leaders or sales leaders move to a new company, sales compensation is generally right at the top of the list of things that they need to be concerned about, they want to understand, they may need to fix. And I think that's because there's this old adage that sales compensation drives behavior. And maybe a less polite way of saying that is that sales reps are coin operated, which, by the way, is a huge trigger for me. I hate that word, to be honest with you, coin operated. I think it demeans the role of the sales rep. It makes them feel like they're very automated, and it's not in keeping with what we ask our sales reps to do and what we're paying them to do. So I thought I'd start with a little a data point. We do a lot of research. We just came out of our winter sales study, and we found that most reps, in fact, 91%, say they are either satisfied or at least neutral with their compensation plan. And strangely enough, that 91% includes the 44% some odd who didn't make quota. So it's interesting that both reps who make quota and don't make quota, generally speaking, like I said, are either satisfied or neutral with their compensation plans. But to understand that a little bit, you got to dig into the data. Reps who exceeded quota rated award trips and equity as the least motivating components of their compensation, which tells you they're a little bit maybe short-term focused. And in my view, that's okay, right? That's what we want them to do. We want them to be focused on bringing in customers this quarter, this year. They also said that variable incentives and high on-target earnings are the most important elements for them. Now, that varies, as you might expect, between reps who hit quota and those who didn't. And those who miss their quota tend to put more emphasis on a higher or at least a reasonable base salary. They want that security. They may be afraid they're not going to hit plan. They're not going to get into accelerators. They may not achieve those goals. And that leads us to our first discussion topic, which is goal setting or quota setting. And, it's pretty clear that quotas and compensation are closely related. And the challenge is really to balance the needs of the company to hit their overall plan with the needs of the sales rep and the sales organization to set goals that are not completely unrealistic. So, Christine, I'm going to put you on the spot to start with and ask you to talk about how you approach this idea of annual quota setting and a little bit maybe about what's your philosophy where things like overrides and over coverage are concerned.
Yeah, so I think that, this is such an important topic, and the more time that you spend trying to figure this out in the beginning of the year, the better, set up you're going to be for the rest of the year. And in my experience, what we've done for quota setting and goal setting is starting with budget, understanding what, first of all, did we commit to the board? And then what piece is my team or what piece is another team going to take on? And then at the same time, it's about looking at historical performance. So looking at different market segments. Do we currently have the right market segments? Do we need to change them based on, what a certain account band performed in the previous year versus what we expected to do? And from that, just taking as much data as possible and using that to say, okay, here's the stretch goal that we think we can get to. Here's the attainable goal that we think we can get to, and comparing that to the budget and kind of, aligning. And this is probably what, a better tool, we do this all in Excel right now, would help us with, but kind of aligning those two things up to make sure that we're both meeting budget, but that we're setting attainable goals for the team, and that there's science behind it. Because the worst thing as a leader is going to your team and saying, here's your goal, and then having somebody come back and say, well, how did you guys get there? And why is that goal so much higher than this other goal that I had last year? So really being able to explain the nuts and bolts, at least for me, has been really helpful. And then over coverage, I think is absolutely important. As a second line leader, third line leader, you get into, even in your best year, you're going to have people leave that you don't expect, and you're going to have time where you don't have reps enroll to cover, the quota that you had for them. So we definitely approach quota setting with over coverage for each manager level.
Do you cascade that down to the reps, I assume?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. And I think you're spot on with this idea of balancing between the corporate's goals, what does the budget say, and what can you realistically expect from the sales organization? And that's always a little bit of art and science, perhaps, which, Elaine, maybe brings me to you. I'd like to hear your views on this quota setting, goal setting, because I know you guys do this at Forma.ai, obviously, but also you're talking to a lot of customers about compensation and what does that mean. So anything you can share there?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I find it interesting, the metric that you mentioned earlier, that research of 91% satisfied or neutral. That feels extremely high.
Yeah.
Because you probably look at a lot of engagement studies, and comp is, for salespeople, usually one of the lowest drivers in terms of how they rated it. So that to me is a remarkable metric and impressive. From a quota setting process and this notion of stretch, I mean, there's definitely value in the stretch, and I think what Christine articulated is spot on. We just got to be careful when we're putting in a stretch that it's in this kind of ideal range of, we call it kind of good to peak sales effort. If you're under that range, quotas tend to be low, meaningless. They don't really drive behavior. You're overpaying reps. If you're above that range, quotas become somewhat impossible to achieve, and you get the reverse, which is, people lose motivation and they stop delivering on sales. So that's kind of one thought around the whole notion of stretch. But when it comes to quota setting more broadly, I think lots can go wrong, and there's often quite a few signs of a quota setting problem. You either have extreme outliers on both ends. You have a lot of good salespeople turning over and leaving your organization. You have comp spend that's higher than you anticipated, sometimes lower than you anticipated. And really being able to kind of go back to Christine's point, look at the data to figure out the why behind it. I think Christine also hit on another piece, which is incorporating this notion of opportunity and potential into your quota setting process. Something that is outside of the control of your salespeople, but ultimately influences their opportunity of hitting target. So I second this notion of use analytics to set quotas. Also kind of strive for simplicity and kind of manage that trade-off between simplicity and accuracy, because we can get very mathematical about how we set quotas. And the more mathematical, the more accurate technically it is. But how far does it take you away from simplicity and being able to explain it to salespeople? Lots of other kind of ideas we can share here. I think the last one I'll leave you with is, I think you mentioned kind of an art and a science. Give your managers the opportunity to refine quotas, obviously within some certain thresholds. Let them apply kind of their local knowledge to the quota setting process as they start to allocate the quota and the stretch down to the individual seller.
So you both sort of touched on something that I think is really interesting and a little bit hard to gauge, which is some of the ability of a sales rep to make plan, to hit quota, is outside their control, right? They may have an account that gets acquired that was one of their largest revenue producers or largest targets. They may have a product that gets delayed. There may be a new competitor that emerges. Lots of things can happen that reps can't control. And we've had this discussion with a lot of organizations about their philosophy when it comes to compensation, right? Do they make adjustments for those types of changes? Do they want to overpay top performers and grossly underpay low performers, for example? What do they consider, attainment, and when do accelerators kick in? So I'm curious if either of you, and Elaine, we'll start with you. Do you find that either within Forma.ai or with your clients, do they have any sort of formal documentation of their philosophy, what we might call a charter that says, this is how we think about sales compensation?
I think there's two pieces to that. If I can break it down, the first was this notion of, in the scenario of exceptions, right? In these scenarios that are outside of their direct control, what do you do? I think if you talk to many sales organizations, we'd love Christine's thoughts on it. I mean, you've seen most of this. You've seen this over the past several years. There should be documentation and having thought through, if this scenario, what happens? What do I do from a quota setting standpoint? Where do I exempt reps? Where do I give a break within the compensation plan? So I think you can get to this point of documenting some of those exceptions and scenarios that lie outside of their control. Maybe I'll pause there. Happy to talk about kind of guiding principles, but would love to hear Christine's thoughts as she's come across some of these outside of a rep's control.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, in theory, this is one of those things that's like a really nice to have, where you have this all documented and you have a conversation about it with your leadership team. But in practice, a lot of startups don't have, the time to do this, and they're scrambling to get things done. And so a lot of it is just kind of passed along from your CRO in, this is my approach, and here's what we think about, underperformers, overperformers, that kind of thing. But I think it's a great idea. I do think that you definitely, and even when I'm, talking to the new company that I'm joining, you ask questions about what is their philosophy around compensation. And we all know the companies that have hey, we're just going to hire people, and if they fail and they can't meet their quota, then that's fine. It's easy for them to realize that and get out soon. And I personally I hate that approach. I mean, it's just like,
I do too. I think it's foolish and crazy expensive. It's just to say we're going to hire 50 people and it's okay if 25 of them fail. That's insane. You don't do that with any other profession.
Yeah, and to me, it speaks of a leadership team that doesn't actually know how to hire.
Yeah.
And so they're just saying, okay, we're gonna hire as many people as possible who have the right pedigree or the right resume, and we're gonna bring them on, and then we're gonna let the comp plan separate the cream from the fat.
Now you're starting to take us down this whole path of are salespeople born? Are they trained? But that's not going to be our focus for today. And it is interesting, this sort of conflict that you allude to. Conflict. Well, I think that's a good word, between finance and sales. Typically, sales leadership wants to reward performers. They want to reward sales reps who do what we're asking them to do. And many times that includes things like accelerators and trips, et cetera. And finance, rightfully so, is always keeping an eye on the budget. And so, that to me kind of leads to our next topic, which is this law of unintended consequences. My experience has been, if you allow finance, and this is going to sound negative, but to control the compensation design, you quickly get into these unintended consequences. Maybe you're not rewarding the right behavior. You're too focused on your sales budget. You're trying to be too restrictive. You're putting, heaven forbid, caps on compensation plans. Those types of things, right? And then you start to get into spiffs and contests, et cetera. So, Elaine, again, I want to start with you. What's been your experience around this, like sales comp design that has led to unintended consequences, and how can you avoid some of that when you're going through the design process?
Yeah, I think this notion of trying to solve for a bunch of issues with compensation is very, very common. What that ends up leading to is all these unintended consequences. I think there's a bunch of, the examples are plenty. One, you mentioned capping a plan to control for that financial upside. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what's going to happen? Your reps are going to hoard sales to the next quarter or the next year when they're actually going to get paid for it, because they can. When you start to, there's a bunch of different kind of examples of it. When you start to, incent people on team incentives to drive teamwork and a better sales culture. And the objective is spot on, but the behavior it drives is probably a few folks sitting back while others do all the work. There's a bunch of these different types of examples, and happy to share more where you intended for one thing, but something else happened as a result. So what we would recommend a lot of our clients do is kind of war game it, sit down with a broader committee beyond just the comp committee, bring people not just from finance and HR and sales, but from other parts of the company to think through what could happen if you were to implement a specific metric in the plan, if you were to set a certain threshold. Just brainstorm all these different options of what can a rep actually do with all of based off of what you just designed, and either accept it or mitigate against it or change the design and tweak it right out of the gate so you get the desired behavior.
Christine, this is going to be front and center for you in your new role. So what's your feeling on, well, Spiffs, contests, award trips, those types of things? How big a role should those play? And what are some of the tips and tricks, maybe things you have to avoid when you're putting those together?
I mean, I think, and just to touch a little bit on what Alain said about partnering with finance, I think that is at the forefront of whatever you do, that you can't have a good plan if you're in conflict with your finance team. Yeah. So establishing really good relationships and building that trust prior to starting comp plans is key, because then you can, as a leader, you essentially have a negotiation with that finance lead around why something like a spiff will work and why something like a cap won't. And you can logically talk through the steps with them about, if we do this in the comp plan, then this is what a rep is going to do. Do we want that? Are we okay with that? And it's not just I think this, it's let's make this decision together so that, we all feel good when something does actually happen and it's not like, well, I told you so. But I think for us, smaller things like spiffs and accelerators, and we at HackerOne, we have an amazing president's club. So I think it might be contrary to, maybe some of the research, but it is absolutely a key motivator for the people who, almost get their goal and the people who make their goal. And that's just because we make a big deal out of it. And then when we're on the trip, it's like so unbelievably overwhelming that people come back and they're like, you have to go. There's no way that you can work for this company and not go on that trip. So I think that when used in the right way and when talked about and when actually aligned with the behavior, they can be amazing.
Yeah.
And spiffs are a great way to just have a short-term reaction and a short-term, in this quarter, we need you guys to do this. So we're creating a spiff for it.
So I'm curious and I agree with you about contest or President's Club or, Chairman's Club or whatever you want to call it. I always found those motivating, both as a sales rep and a sales operations leader. In fact, my biggest complaint as a sales operations leader was that I was responsible for organizing them and giving them go. I'm like, well, that's not fair. But I want to come back to this idea of spiffs just for a moment. Mm-hmm. Do you think about, so, let's say, for example, we want reps to fill their pipeline. We were going to have an early pipeline spiff, or maybe at the end of the quarter, we're going to have an accelerator or something like that. When you're modeling those out, wargaming them, to use your term, do you think about what they're going to stop doing, right? Is there a fear that they'll over-rotate, start focusing on product A to the exclusion of product B, or, to your point, maybe even push a deal out to the next quarter because they know they're not going to qualify this quarter? Is that part of the thought process for you?
For me, yes, it definitely is. But I think that's where, it's not just about setting up the right, spiffs and setting up the right comp plan. It's also about making sure that your leaders are executing on the day-to-day and that they're actually inspecting what's going on. So it's not just I can create a spiff and I'm gonna set it and forget it and let the reps figure out how to prioritize. It's using this knowledge. How are you going to, focus on this area, but you still got to keep the wheels on the bus for the rest of your business. Yeah. Because future you will be very angry at Q1 you if you only focus on this spiff.
Great point. Future you. I like that. And I don't want to look, I've got enough regrets. I don't need to look back and have more. Ellen, I know you guys work with a lot of organizations. Do you give them guidelines on Spiffs? Are there anything formal tips and tricks that you can share?
Yeah, and I think Christine hit on a key piece. It is short term, so you don't really want it to take away from what's your broader strategic objectives. You don't want it to take attention away from that core plan. So you just got to make sure, however you design it, whatever the metric is, whatever you're trying to accomplish is more complementary as opposed to conflict with the core plan. You probably also want to use them sparingly as opposed to, every month or two you roll out a new spiff. 2 to 3 times a year is our recommendation usually. Max quarterly, which a lot of companies will do. But you also want to manage how much you spend on it. So it's not, again, it doesn't compete or take over what the core plan is and where they're actually supposed to earn their money. Usually about 3 to 7% of that total incentive spend would be associated with a spiff. And the best spiffs are ones that kind of self-fund themselves. We want to go back to kind of partnering with finance. How do you design a spiff that self-funds itself and kind of use that money to incent reps?
The presumption being there would be incremental revenue generated or bookings as a result of that spiff. Yeah, that makes sense. I want to come back for a moment to this idea of behavior. And I think, Christina, it builds on what you were starting to talk about, which is communication of the plan and making sure people understand the plan. And also making sure they can look at an opportunity and go, okay, if I close this, it's worth X to me, or this is where I am against attainment. So 2 aspects there. When you're first rolling out a compensation plan, thoughts on how to communicate that to the organization and maybe what you've seen in terms of best practices. And of course, we love to hear about failed practices. So if you feel like sharing some of those as well, please feel free. Christine,
Sure. So I think that no matter what you do with a comp plan, no matter how much time you spend on it, no matter how much you think you've done, there are going to be tons of questions. So obviously rolling something out, having a session, walking through the comp plan, and then having, a Q&A section, changes from the previous year. But then knowing that you're going to have a bunch of questions following up to that, because people will read it and have immediate questions. People won't read it and they'll have questions in 2 months. And then at the end of the year, you'll have more questions because they've forgotten and they haven't read it. So I would just say, you want to have time for it because you want people to feel comfortable and motivated. But you also at some point have to say, and this is the plan, and we've had the discussion about it and we're going to move on so that you can actually start making money and bringing revenue into the company. For me, just kind of tips and tricks is just having a smaller session prior to a larger team rollout. So you have people who might be more prone to asking a lot of questions. And that's rep wise. You obviously have one with your managers prior to that. Just so you can kind of get that all out so that in the bigger session, there are none of these big looming questions or the aha moments. And there are always people that reps will go to say, hey, you really understand this, or hey, you had some really good questions. And those are the people that you want to fill with as much information as possible so that they can then disseminate it to the rest of the team in a, rep to rep manner.
So in a follow-up to that, are you using a tool to, and I guess this is relevant to HackerOne, but maybe this for your new company as well. Are they using any sort of incentive tool, or is it integrated into their CRM platform where reps can see, here's how I'm progressing against my goals?
So at HackerOne, we've set it up pretty straightforward. We use Clary to track, forecasts and revenue. And so it's pretty straightforward. They can see exactly what's been booked and what's going to count. But then, no, it's in Excel for right now. We are rolling out a new tool at HackerOne for the future.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, I would say, kind of a drawback, is that reps spend a lot of time doing their own calculations and trying to figure out, did I make the right amount of money on this? What's wrong? And they're going to do that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have like a really foolproof system of saying, here's how you're getting paid and here's what you got paid, they won't waste as much time and, energy, because it's very important. Like, this is key to why we are in sales, is that salespeople want to get paid.
Yeah, very true. And understanding how they're going to get paid and where they are against their goals, I think, is critically important. And Alon, this is probably a big softball for you, because you guys are in this business, but I think you can share, maybe across your experiences, some of the pros and cons or tips and tricks to enabling sales reps with technology in terms of compensation.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to go back to one piece though, Steve, this notion of kind of change management and communication as we roll a new plan out. I think there's two additional. I loved what Christine said. I'd add two pieces. One, this notion of what we changed and why we changed it.
Mm-hmm.
What I often found works really well is, side by side, here's your old plan, here's your new plan, and here's why this is different. I think that gets them thinking about what are some of those strategic objectives. The other piece is what I often find powerful, because I think sales reps end up doing it, is, okay, how much would I have earned under this new plan last year? How does that compare to what I actually earned? So what you'll notice in rolling out a new plan is some people will earn more, some people will probably earn less, and that's by design. And just having figured out what that communication is, and having perhaps, what Christine suggested is those one-on-ones before a broader rollout to explain that and explain why it's happening. So just wanted to call those two out.
No, I think that's great. Yeah.
Then this notion of kind of the tools and the transparency and the visibility. That's a key piece to what we do here at Forma. Reps have to have visibility into how they're earning. Reps have to have visibility into where they're doing well and where they're not. Reps need to understand how you got to a certain dollar amount. Otherwise, to Christine's point, they're going to go out, do some shadow accounting and figure it out on the side. And guess what? It might be right, it might be wrong. Either way, it'll cause a bigger conversation that you probably wanted to. So for me, it's a kind of hard rule against any kind of black box compensation plans, and really being transparent in how people get there. Where we're moving to now is not just telling you how well you did, but telling you how to get to that next tier. If you're at 80% attainment and your threshold's at 85, well, how do you get to that 85? Help a rep, nudge them in the right direction, change that behavior so that they can earn more and you can drive revenue.
Those are great tips. I'm sorry, Christine, were you going to add something to that?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's probably one of the worst places you can be in as a rep and as a manager, where you're at the end of the year and you don't even know, like, what are the steps that the person needs to take to get to that acceleration, or what's the, to get to that quota. And, once you figure it out, then the rep can really turn up the volume if they need to. And I've seen that happen where thankfully the rep had enough time and just made quota by like $20,000 on a multi-million-dollar quota.
Yeah, and how do you do that throughout the year, as opposed to
it's not a scramble
2 months before the end of the year, where it might be a little bit of a scramble?
Right, exactly. So I wanted to come back to something you said, Alain, which is about, or both of you, when you roll out the plan, a little mental tool, or maybe even written tool that I've used in the past, and I cannot take credit for it, but is to think about stop, start, continue. Right? What is it you want the reps to stop doing? Stop selling this product. Stop, promoting one-time revenue. We want you to start selling recurring revenue. We want you to start selling multi-year contracts. and what is it you want them to continue doing. And I found that if I can't put some thoughts around that and express it clearly, then I probably am going to have an issue when I try to explain this to sales reps. And I'm not saying sales reps are simplistic. Hopefully we disavowed that myth at the very beginning. But you want to communicate clearly with them. This is your compensation plan, and it should be a direct reflection of the goals that the corporation and the broader sales organization is trying to achieve. So on that note, and Christine, maybe for you, do you focus a lot of the rollout time on the first line sales managers and getting their buy-in so that they become the champions for the new comp plan?
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones who they're going to be answering the majority of the questions, and they're going to be the ones who are getting the questions that the reps maybe. And this was like a learning for me where I moved from being a first line manager and then second, where even some of the reps that I had personally managed, they then didn't want to bring the questions about comp to me. And it was because they were like, oh, we don't want to, you're our director. And, I don't want to, bring you down to that level. And I'm like, but I hired you. And, I used to spend 4 hours a week with you. Like, and you can't ask me that question. And so it's just true. Like, they're going to ask the hard questions to their managers, and they're going to ask the hard questions to each other as well. And you as a leader, you may never hear them. And that's the worst, where if people, don't have the right answers, your managers don't have the right answers to kind of make people feel comfortable with what you're doing, then that's what breeds discontent. And that can be kind of something that festers under the surface and then only comes out when people leave halfway through the year. And then what are you going to do?
Yeah, very much so. Ellen, thoughts on that about the implementation of the plan, the communication, the rollout, and especially first-line sales managers and how to get their buy-in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to Christine's point around time, you gotta give yourself time to make this happen, but also back it up with data. Why you're making the decision, why you're making certain changes, and knowing again the implications of some of those changes helps communication. First-line managers have to be part of the conversation. They're going to be instrumental to rolling this out and getting buy-in, but they also have to be bought into it as well. Because you probably, in changing the rep plans, you're probably changing the first line manager plans at the same time. And that's a big communication effort that you need to take into account.
So we've got a few minutes left, and I want to ask, I have two more. Well, one's a question, one not so much a question. The second one is, I'm going to ask you for a tweetable moment, a summary, your philosophy on compensation. So be thinking about that so that you're ready to wow the audience. The second one is more philosophical, and this is a debate that we have with our clients sometimes of, should you launch quota and compensation during the annual sales kickoff? Or should you do it before? Should you do it after? And I won't sort of, prejudice the jury. I want to hear your thoughts on it. And Christine, I'm going to pick on you first and kind of get what your philosophy is.
There's so much that happens with sales kickoff, and at least in the past, they've happened at the same time of year because you try to get everybody together, and it makes sense from a scheduling perspective, but it just means that there's a glut of information that is really hard for reps to sort through and to retain. And then a lot of the times you're doing QBRs on top of that. So I would say no. It's hard because you also don't want to lose that time where you don't want people to be, not motivated by their comp plan. So I would say either before, which, that's in a perfect world, or at least a week after. Give them some breathing room and then roll it out afterward.
I second that. I think the distraction on either end, the distraction because you don't know what's coming, or I just got this plan and I don't understand it. It takes away from everything else you're doing at that event. But it also perhaps demotivates some of your salespeople. So I think this whole notion of time and communication, you can't do that at one event while you're doing everything else. So I would do it separately. There's probably some component of comp that you may want to cover within within that event. And maybe if you've rolled it out a couple weeks prior to it, it's just another opportunity for questions and answers and one-on-ones with individuals to talk through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely tend to agree with you, and I think this is consistent with some of the work we've done with our clients of either do it a couple of weeks beforehand, so you have time for the dust to settle and the questions to be answered, so that people can walk into kickoff ready to learn, ready to build enthusiasm, or include an element in kickoff of back to what we talked about. This is our compensation philosophy. This is our guiding principles. This is what we want you to stop, start, continue, so that you're setting the stage for the rollout of the compensation plan over the next couple of weeks. Yeah. I do think, and I'm still shocked at how many organizations do this, that waiting until the middle of the year to roll out somebody's compensation plan is a huge mistake. But we see it again and again and again. So just shocking.
I mean, I think with that, I've been in an instance with where we had a comp plan and it was rolled out, and then we realized, I was a rep, that it was not attainable. And it was really like there were some serious problems, and we fixed it. We fixed it mid-year. So it's okay. I think like it's not like if you have a bad comp plan and it's driving the wrong behavior, fix it. Don't wait until the end of the year, or don't wait to roll out your comp plan 6 months into the year because you're really trying to make it absolutely perfect. It's messy, and you shouldn't do that, from one year to the next. It's kind of like you get a, one get out of jail free card. But I would say if you're already in that situation, it's worse not to have a comp plan for 6 months than it is to maybe correct errors in a comp plan 6 months in.
So we did get a question in chat about, in which you just mostly answered there, Christine. How often should you assess or analyze your compensation plan to make sure that it is on track and you're neither grossly over or under budget, or you're people don't understand it? Monthly, quarterly, twice a year, never wait till the end of the year and see how things resulted. What are your thoughts?
I don't have a blanket, this is the thing to do, because everyone's business is different, and it totally depends on the size of business that you have and the growth that you have. I have, my husband did compensation for Facebook early on, and they were redoing their comp plans every quarter because somebody would sign a deal that was like, well, they just doubled their quota for the entire year. We need to reassess because that was a bluebird, and so now we're raising quotas. So I would always have a little part of your comp plan say like, this is subject to change, and just make sure that reps understand. And most people, they're reasonable. They understand, hey, your entire annual quota was $4 million and you signed an $8 million deal a month into your year. We're going to pay you for that, but we're going to look at your quota for the rest of the year in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for some high growth companies, especially where it's hard to predict how fast the company's going to grow or what is a realistic quota. And so you do have to analyze the plan much more frequently. We got another question on, do Spiffs work for enterprise sales? And I'll give you my thoughts, then I'm curious on yours. I would say a qualified yes, right? I think a Spiff has to be tied to something that the sales rep can directly affect. So if you roll out a short-term Spiff and you're dealing with enterprise reps with an 18-month sales cycle, you're probably not going to get a lot of uplift for that. Now, you could roll out a Spiff that says, hey, we want you to get them to an event that we're having. We want you to get a meeting with the CIO. We want you to, put an upsell proposal in front of them. Things that are within the sales rep's control could be motivational for an enterprise sales rep. Elaine, any comments on that?
No, I think you nailed it. Just qualifying that question was right. I think you can. The question is, what can they control in that short term? These are short-term incentives to drive immediate behavior. Define what that immediate behavior is, and design a Spiff accordingly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I would just say also with enterprise, we have long sales cycles. I wouldn't make it on the end goal, like the end sale. It's the steps in between. And then we also let people know a quarter out. Like we've already announced our Q2 Spiff because enterprise, you have to really like have advance notice to change what you're doing.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to announce the Spiffs, in advance.
I think the question to ask is, what is it we want sales reps to do differently as a result of this Spiff? How are we going to measure that? How do we make it fair? How do we make it attainable, right? And how do we eliminate any bias? So I'm not a big fan of things like MBOs, because when you look at the data, almost everyone gets them, right? You might as well just put it into their base salary. So following up on this idea, I'm looking at the questions in chat of when to deliver comp plans. We have a question on what's the acceptable time frame to deliver plans for the new fiscal year. Is it in Q1 before the year begins? Is it later? What do you typically target when rolling out a new plan?
Before the year begins. Ideally, you're rolling it out, ideally along with its quota, right? So you roll out the comp plan, you roll out the quota, you start, let's say calendar year and fiscal year aligned Jan 1st, you know what your objectives are. You know how you're going to go get this target and earn your payout. Before the year starts.
I have a slightly different opinion. And it's just because like end of year, you're really grinding to get those last deals in. And so honestly, I do not want to take the focus off of the business at hand that we can still get closed in the year with having, like, obviously preparation for the future year is really important, but so much magic happens in that last month of a year that even if you take a fraction of it away, that will affect your year. And then it's going to affect the next year. So, I think that probably, first quarter for sure. I think that if you can really get your ducks in a row, you have like the break after the end of the year to let people breathe a little bit. You have sales kickoff QBRs, and then you're rolling out your comp plans by the last week of Feb 1st, or we're on fiscal year. So I'm talking that first week of March.
Yeah. I'm sort of in between the two of you because I'm with you, Christine. A lot of magic happens in December or whenever your fiscal year closes, that last quarter. But I think you don't want to leave too much space between the close and the start. Otherwise, people are sitting there going, well, gee, should I close this deal? I don't know if this account is going to be mine next year. I don't know how I'm going to get paid for this. And too much of a breather might be detrimental to the organization as well. So it's definitely a balance between getting the new territories, the new quotas, and the new plans out while allowing them to finish up all the hard work that they're doing at the end of that year. Okay, one more question from the audience, and then we'll get to our tweetable moment. And this one is interesting, and I think the answer might be it depends. But should compensation plans be built around product sales or overall sales number? In other words, if you have 4 or 5 product lines, do you give reps a quota for each product line, some form of incentive to say you got to sell a little bit of everything? Or do you just tell them your number's $1 million, we don't care how you get there? And I know that's it depends answer, but I'm curious on what you think.
I can take a crack at it.
Please,
yeah, look, it depends, but you got to be careful about this notion of balanced selling. Sell all these products and I'll incent you if you hit everything. Just mathematically, the more products that you expect them to hit, the more metrics you expect them to hit, the less likely they're going to be to hit everything and achieve their payout. So people will likely give up at some point as that number of products goes up. The other piece to that is sometimes what happens is I'll just stop worrying about this one that I just achieved because I'm not going to earn that much more. I'm now going to focus on this other one that might be a little bit harder. Overall sales could potentially go down as a result. So I think there's value in individual product sales and some incentives around it. You just got to be careful about the behavior, the wrong unintended behavior that we talked about earlier that you might cause as a result.
Yeah. Christine, anything you want to add?
Keep it simple. I mean, I think that Ellen touched on this, but like, if you have 10 different products that you want to sell, think about business goals. What does the business need? Do they need product number 7 to really, be the winner in the horse race? Okay, then we're going to set up incentives to make sure that people are selling product number 7 and then the rest of the products that we have. But ultimately, revenue is revenue. And so if the company just wants to have revenue from their products, I wouldn't put too many, handcuffs on people to sell one product or another, because you don't want to do what Alan just said is, okay, I've hit my quota for here, so I'm going to stop selling the thing that's bringing in revenue and that's like really great to sell. I'm going to focus on this other thing that might not actually be the best fit for the, market segment that we're currently selling into. I think that's where Spiffs come into play. Like, if you really need to focus on a current product, put a Spiff around it. But yeah, I probably wouldn't break it down that much.
Keep it simple. Maybe your tweetable moment. So if you can come back to that if you want. And we definitely agree with you, right? We counsel our clients no more than 3, maximum of 5 elements in the compensation plan, components of the compensation plan. Anything more than that, and you're overcomplicating it, and reps quickly go, well, I'm just going to sell whatever I can and hope I get paid for it. So it is not the ultimate driver of minute behavior. Okay, let's come to the lightning round, if you will, the tweetable moments. And I don't know if one of you wants to volunteer to go first, but what's that 240 character takeaway where compensation design and planning is concerned? Elaine?
Happy to go first. I don't have a Twitter account, so can't really tweet this. Incentive programs to me are a great motivational tool to steer reps in the right direction, drive growth. Don't let it have the opposite effect. Don't solve for problems that are not a comp problem with a compensation plan. Use data to inform all your decisions, whether that's in how you design your plans or how you set your quotas. Mm-hmm. Is that 240 or more?
I have no idea, but they're all good thoughts. So thank you. Christine?
I guess I would just come back to the keep it simple. Like, really, you want to take what is important to the business and then what is important to the seller. And how do we bring those two together to create a comp plan that motivates the right behavior to grow the business, and that you don't spend too much time talking about or figuring out, and the churn that happens with comp plans every year.
Yeah, I love that. I think if you're spending days and weeks trying to explain the compensation plan to someone, it's probably too complicated, right? So, and again, if we come back to our opening thought of, yes, compensation does guide behavior, you have to make sure that the person understands it and knows what it is you're asking them to do, and will be rewarded for doing that. And there should be a direct line between those activities. So, Elaine, Christine, I really want to thank the both of you. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I appreciate you bringing your expertise to our audience today. So thank you very much. And I think we'll wrap it up. I don't know if Janisha wants to come back in with any closing comments. And Janisha, you're on mute if you wanted to close us out. There we go. Yes.
Yes, no. Of course, that would happen on my first time. Hey, folks, sorry about that. Thank you so much for joining us. I think Goldcast knew I should stay away, right? The panel was just too good. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our amazing panelists and to Steve for moderating so beautifully. I thought that was incredible. And we appreciate you all for joining. We at the MSP team will make sure that the recording and all the key takeaways will be sent to you all afterwards, and it will be up on our site very shortly. So the panelists and I are going to go backstage and just have some closing thoughts together, but we really appreciate you joining us and hope to see you at our next MSP events. And with that, have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us on a Friday. All right, take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
Thanks.